The newest hero shooter on the block, Marvel Rivals, is finally here. And whether you've been grinding Overwatch nonstop or you've never touched a hero shooter, this is the perfect beginner's guide for you, going over everything you need to know about heroes, synergies, how to choose your perfect main, roles, and so much more. Now, we're going to be putting out a crazy amount of Marvel Rivals educational content, so do yourself a favor and press that subscribe button right now so you don't miss out on a single upload, and let's get into it. Now, first off, Marvel Rivals falls under the term hero shooter. And what this means is there's a large amount of characters that all operate fundamentally different from each other, especially in Rivals where characters are going to have abilities that are going to be on cooldowns, where every time you use these abilities, there's going to be a certain time frame before you can use them again. And there's going to be a difference between passive and active abilities. Passive being abilities that trigger automatically or are intrinsic to your character, so they give your character some set of abilities that other characters don't have, but you do not have to manually trigger it, it's just automatic. And then active abilities are things that you have to press a button and trigger, and then they're going to be on that cooldown like we said before. In addition to that, in this hero shooter, every single character is going to have a unique primary fire, so don't expect every single person to be shooting the same way or at all. Some melee characters exist, and part of what makes a hero shooter special is that every character is going to feel very unique from one another, so you can find the heroes that fit you the best. In addition to that, characters are going to have powerful ultimates, super abilities that can only be generated by healing over time slowly or dealing damage. And ultimates are typically so strong that they can change the entire fight, getting solo kills by themselves, healing your entire team, resurrecting people. Needless to say, how you use your ultimates can often decide whether you win a fight or an entire game. Now, characters are divided into 3 different roles, and these roles have different capabilities and also responsibilities if you're trying to win and ultimately lead your team to victory. First off is the strategist, which also could be called the support. These are characters that have the capability of heal and also have powerful abilities that can assist their team, from teleporters to things that can resurrect their team closer to the fight. I would warn new players to not think about strategists or support as healers, because while these characters can heal, and it's a big part of what makes them really strong, and one of the ways they get a lot of value. Supports can kill things, supports can deal damage, supports can make plays, supports can do other things that help the team win besides just healing. But the next role is Vanguard, otherwise known as Tank, and these are characters that can withstand a lot of damage and not immediately die. They have a lot of abilities that allow them to take on damage and still stay alive, heal themselves, or allow their team to go in and actually fight the enemy by giving them certain health or speed-related boosts. In some ways, there are going to be some overlap between Strategist and Vanguard, but the main deciding thing about a Vanguard is the high health totals and the ability to survive. There's a concept that I'm not going to get too into in this video because it is a beginner's guide called space, or the areas on the map that you want to control and take over. Vanguards in particular can occupy open space or open areas on the map and not instantly die. They can get shot by multiple people and not instantly die, and they are typically going to be the catalyst that takes damage from the enemy and then gets healed up by the strategist and are often on the front line. Now, last but certainly not least is the duelist, or the DPS role, and these are the characters that are going to be the most active at dealing damage, getting kills, and potentially trying to make plays as an individual. They have high dueling capabilities, large amounts of damage, and the potential to make plays, win 1v1s, or challenge the enemy team. Now, of course, the lines between a duelist, a Vanguard, and a strategist is closer than you think. A lot of these roles actually overlap with each other, and some of the descriptors I gave for duelists still apply to certain Vanguards and strategists as well. And of course, individual characters are going to play far differently from one another, so there'll definitely be sub-roles to the main roles that will be created down the line, but we'll get to that in a more advanced video later, so subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. Then number 3, we got to talk about heroes, and there are going to be certain synergies that heroes unlock by being played together. Certain characters that if you pick both of them, now all of a sudden you get an extra active ability, and this is super strong and really amazing potentially because you get to turn a character into a stronger character as long as you're playing it with someone else. But the power level of these synergies are kind of a mixed bag. Some of them are so strong that you would be a fool not to set up that synergy, and other ones are not necessary to make your individual characters viable. As an example, in the previous beta, Magneto was super strong when you activated his synergy, giving him a sword that allowed him to get a lot of damage out and potentially get kills. But even without it, he was still a top 2 character in the entire game. No synergy required. So don't disregard a character just because you don't have their synergy. Now, we do need to talk about compositions, and notably Marvel Rivals is 6v6, and most people think, okay, that means you're going to need 2 supports, 2 tanks, and 2 DPS. But I will tell you right now that this might not be the strongest composition. Right now, it's very unsolved. while this might make sense, hey, we need a balance in all the roles, not always is this going to be true. As an example, there was a really powerful 3 tank, 3 support composition being played at the highest levels in last beta, but there were also characters that could counteract the composition when played, like Iron Man, for example. There was also single Vanguard or tank composition centering around Venom being a sort of diver that was very survivable, but maybe a buff or nerf makes it so that he would have a hard time staying alive by himself. I'm giving you a lot of anecdotes here because I don't want you to just think, oh, if we don't have a 2-2-2 composition, we're throwing and we can't win the game. Absolutely not true. So while composition can be important and having like a 0 support composition would be pretty bad, it's still possible to win in a lot of different variations of what you would think is standard. Then the next thing that we need to talk about is how to choose a main. And we're actually going to have a follow-up guide to this going into detail about every single character and what mains you should pick based on what you like to do. But for now, I would just say try every single character. You're not going to know if you like a character if you don't try it. And even if you don't end up maining a character, it's a good idea to have a good understanding of every single character's abilities because you're going to be playing against them. And if you know how their abilities work, you can make better game plans, you can play around their cooldowns, and just generally just understand the context of the game better. Now, one thing that I will note is that you need to be more flexible in Rivals than other hero shooters in the past, because once you get to Diamond above, you can actually ban characters, and characters can get banned on both sides. This means that if you are a one-trick and you're a known one-trick, people could just outright ban your character. I actually saw that happen a couple of times in the beta playtest, and it was pretty funny, but it's something that you should think about. Being super inflexible is also just something that I generally don't recommend. I think that there's a lot of fun characters to play, powerful characters in every single role. The less characters you play, the worse compositions you can make, the less synergies you can activate, and in general, you'll just have an increase in unwinnable games. Now, I'm not saying that you should play every single character in the game, but at least having 3 to 4 that you play would be my recommendation. Now, more than anything though, if you're trying to find a main, I would say just pick what you find cool and fascinating. I'm gonna make tier lists, other channels are gonna make tier lists. Mostly these videos just get views and they're fun to make, fun to yap about, but as far as using them to decide what you should play, absolutely not. I'm going to tell you right now, any character in the entire game will be possible to climb to the highest elo, like Grandmaster. And if you understand that, then don't base what you find cool and fascinating off of a tier list. Just pick the character that you like to play, get good at it, and then you can reevaluate it later if you want to be more competitive or not, because like I said, any character can still be great. And I also think there's a certain amount of coolness factor at being really good at a character that people just don't mess with as much. You're a little underrated, people don't know how to play against you. So yeah, pick what you like, pick what you want to play. Don't listen to tier lists. I know I'm going to make them, but I'm going to remind you again when I drop those videos as well. Now we do need to talk about game modes and maps, and there's actually 3 different game modes. There's Convoy, which is going to be really similar to like an Overwatch's payload, which means that you are taking one payload, and when you are on the payload and no enemies are on it, your payload moves forward, and when enemies are on it, the payload stops. You have to fight enemies, get them off of it, keep pushing, and there's going to be certain checkpoints that basically change the spawns, and that's going to be a form of definitive progress, which we'll talk a little bit about later. Now, next up is Domination, which is going to be like King of the Hill, where there's a certain objective that players have it. The time ticks up. You're trying to get to 100%. If you kill the enemy, take control of it. Now you're trying to get it to 100%, and you go back and forth, and there's typically 3 maps for King of the Hill, 3 different variations of a map that you get to play on. And then last up is Convergence, which is a point that you have to capture, but then it's going to be Payload or Convoy, where you're pushing something along, and it's very similar to how Convoy plays out. So these are the 3 main modes. They're very similar to other modes that we've seen in other games, but it's still important to understand the difference. And also, there's going to be certain maps that go along with certain modes. You're not going to find a map being played on like Domination and Convoy and Convergence. It's going to be specific maps to specific modes. Now, there's some interesting things about the maps that you need to know. Number 1, there are health packs all around different maps, and it's a good idea to start to learn where these health packs are, because if you're being chased, you're in a 1v1, being able to dip out to a health pack can be the difference between you stabilizing and you winning that fight or losing it. Like, as an example, if you're fighting someone there at 1 HP, they turn around the corner, you might think, hey, I'm going to chase them and kill them. But if there's a health pack in there and you know they grabbed it, if you chase them, they could potentially kill you, so you back off instead. This is something that you kind of need to learn over time. I don't expect you to just memorize all the health pack spots, but it's something to take note of. Take note of when you grab a health pack. Try to think about where they are and try to learn this as fast as you can. In addition to that, there are actually a lot of flank routes that you can get to. especially characters that have good mobility, like being able to fly or teleport or whatever. Knowing these flank routes is really important because getting out of a choke point where enemies are just spitting cooldowns and damage down it could be really good to like open up a fight and make it so that you're not just dying to just all this spam. And I would say in general, from what I have seen, there are pretty much like tons of flank routes on every single map. So I'd say like in general, for every choke, there is gonna be a flank route. So keep that in mind. If you're being stuck in a choke, look for that flank route, try to find it, then remember it for next time. In addition to that, maps are destructible, and there are ways to create your own flank routes or force people off certain areas that they're on. They're standing on something that you can just take down the whole building, or there's certain areas that you can actually break and kind of navigate through certain positions. Knowing what's destructible and what's not is good because a position that you're standing in could be really strong, but if your floor is destructible or your building's destructible, you could be forced to move in a way that you don't want to move because enemies destroy your building. So learning this is going to take some time, but I would just say try just randomly shooting various pieces and like objects around the map. Get a feel for what is destructible and what's not. And then last up is bounce pads. There's certain bounce pads that will bounce you up to a high ground. This is where you can like kind of navigate and take certain positions. And it can be a thing that you can do to like force enemies off a certain area before you go and take the objective. Oftentimes, if enemies are like on a high ground overlooking a point, for example, you don't want to go right to point because then enemies can just shoot down onto you and you can't do anything about them. But forcing them off the high ground first with a bounce pad and then going to point can be a way that you're not fighting them while they're looking above you and just able to like throw cooldowns down on you without you being able to do the same thing back to them as easily. The number 6 is team fights. And oftentimes a team fight happens when both sides just kind of clash and you're trading out abilities, cooldowns, ultimates, and typically there are people dying on both sides, right? Now, oftentimes winning the team fight is more important than capping the objective. Like, let's take Koth, for example. Yes, maybe you could just rush to the point and capture the objective and get 1 to 2%. But if that puts you in a position where you just get killed and then your team all dies, you're going to capture like 2, 3, 4%, but your opponent is going to wipe you, get a lot of ultimate charge, and they're going to capture 20, 30%. So just capturing that objective right away was actually not in your best interest. It was better to play with your team, make sure that everyone's alive, and try to win that fight over the objective. Now, there are going to be some moments that this is not true, and it's the concept of locked-in progress versus temporary progress. Like, if the opponents are about to push the payload or the convoy to an objective that changes their spawns, that's a form of locked-in progress. And it's a lot more important to contest that right there, because if they capture that, then their spawns change, and it's basically like you lost this objective permanently, and that means that you need to contest that at all costs. This could mean, in that same example I gave, to just run to point, try to prevent them while your team kind of stumbles in, and find a way to win that fight anyways. But that doesn't mean that you do the same thing when the convoy is just moving along the tracks, because if they're not getting any form of locked-in progress, it's not as important or impactful as that locked-in thing that changes the spawns and cannot be undone. Now, hero shooters, especially with slow time to kill, like Marvel Rivals, are going to be very team-based. Everyone needs to be doing their role and doing it well, and generally be on the same page. There's a lot of abilities that can shut people down or stop them, so ideally, if your teammates are doing something, you want to do the same thing. If your teammates are shooting at something, you want to shoot at the same thing. And this is why pings and active communication is so important, because when one person is shooting at one person and someone else is shooting at someone else, no one is dying and no one is actually generating some of that locked-in value, like getting an actual kill. You're doing a lot of what we call trash damage, which is damage that never actually generates a real kill or gets you a sizable advantage. Essentially, working together creates a magnified effect, and the one general tip I'll give you is, while everyone is going to want to be a leader, like across all roles, sometimes it's good to be a follower. Instead of everyone trying to be a leader and doing their own thing, sometimes it's good to find one person who's doing kind of what you want to do and just help them do that thing or do that thing with them. And you're going to create an amplified effect. But also understand that Marvel Rivals is not like a first-person shooter or a third-person shooter. Rivals is more similar to a resource exchange game, something more akin to like Dota or League of Legends. And what this means is you're trading resources at all times. You're trading resources of heals, cooldowns, damages, ultimates. And this resource exchange is something that you're trying to do to get a leg up, right? you're trying to be more efficient with your abilities. You're trying to be more efficient with your damage so that you force more abilities. And understand that this trade of resources, this ebb and flow, is really what the game is about. It's not about pew pew, I'm dinking people in the head. It's more about how you're trading resources and how you're using your resources to leverage an advantage against your opponent. Now, last up, we got to talk about competitive and ranked. Now, inside of a rank, you're going to go through ranks 1 through 3, and it goes from bronze, silver, gold, platinum, diamond, grandmaster, and then eternity. And then last up is one above all. And these are subject to change, but you're going to be navigating through these ranks as you get better at the game, and you're going to be climbing with wins and losses. And it's going to show you that at the end of every game, whether you win or lose, how you moved and by how much. Now, outside of bronze and silver, which technically count as one rank, players are going to be able to form teams and match together against people in only an adjacent rank. So if you're a gold player, you can play with a platinum player and a silver or even a bronze player, because those are counted as one rank once again. But as a gold player, you cannot duo with a diamond player or a grandmaster player. So this makes it so that the lobbies are relatively fair and that there isn't some super player that is just taking over the entire game because they are way outranked compared to everyone else in the lobby. Now, you also have something called a Chrono Shield, which is just D-rank protection. So if you fall to 0 in a rank before you D-rank out of that rank, it will actually protect you and prevent you from D-ranking. So you would have to actually lose again in order to D-rank. This is nice because it gives you one last chance to prove that you deserve that rank and you don't want to drop. But no worries, if you do drop out of that rank, come back here. We'll give you some tips and tricks so you can climb right back up and beyond very quickly. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is about Diamond and Beyond. Ranked is going to implement the hero ban system where both teams vote for one character to get banned, and that character is not played for the course of the entire game. Now, you can still be in plat and have the ban system if the lobby average is diamond or above. Now, as far as what you ban, you're going to have to talk about that with your team, and it's going to depend on a lot of factors, like what is the strongest character, what character counters your character that you like to play, or just a character that you generally just don't like. But all joking aside, I really hope that this beginner's guide has given you everything you need to jump in, play some rivals, get better, and most importantly of all, have a great fucking time. I hope you enjoyed the content. Do me a solid and smash that like and subscribe if you did, and I'll catch you next time.